so that we're at least here while we get everything finalized. Make sure that's working.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what that was. Technical issues.
Well, I was saying at first I had put on a waiting room, and so I had maybe thought that might have been it.
I
On
rebooted
accident.
my computer after an update.
Ah. Let's lock the meeting. No new attendees can join, so we won't get Zoom bombed or anything. We don't want any sort of crazy things like that to happen. Okay. I'm going to do the social stuff, and we'll be ready to get started. Hall of Fame hair game.
I always like when we start while I'm, setting up the chat and stream on my iPad, because I'm always like looking down to the side. Like, I don't care. I'm looking elsewhere.
Mike, did you create our Twitter handle yet?
I did not. I tried to do it just with my phone, just without creating a new email, and it was like, no, you have to have a new email. So I need to go create a new email account. So I'll probably do that like now.
Okay.
I may have already done an email. I have to check and see.
Well, when I did my videos today, I put that the Twitter handle was incoming, and we'd make an announcement for that.
Okay.
Did
I'll probably make it Star Wars Sacred Text, just so it has Star Wars in the name, so people can find it.
Yeah. I did make an email. It's called the Sacred Text Book Club at gmail.com.
Okay, well, why don't you send me an email with the password in it, so that way I can log on into it and I can do all that. Because I'll need to go through the email and be like, I am the person from this account. I swear.
I will.
Is this a Star Wars focused one you guys are doing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're bored and want to go join in with us, we're doing Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire trilogy for May the 4th.
Okay. I don't know if I'll have enough time. I'm bored, but not necessarily that bored.
Well, when the stack of books is like that too.
Maybe it's just the first one.
I did.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna get through all three. I'm gonna be.
I mean, we can. Yeah, we can do as far as we can.
I did pick up a copy of Thrawn over the weekend, so I'm gonna try and start that trilogy because I've never read it.
Oh, it's good. The new one. It's so good.
For May, like the full month of May, we're gonna do Tarkin.
Social.
All good series.
My wife was kind enough for us to pause our Star Wars movie marathon so that I could do this for this evening.
Nice.
Where'd you stop?
We've watched 6 episodes the last 8 nights.
Nice.
So tonight would have been the new trilogy.
So did you start with the originals or the prequels first?
Well, I didn't get to have any say in this, but we started on one night when I went to get dinner. When I got home, she was like, "Guess what? We're watching The Phantom Menace," and I was like, "Oh, really? Are you sure? Like, why?" But so that was last Monday or Sunday. I don't know. They'll run together now. Just know we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was the order. I did attempt to get her to wean off into Clone Wars after 2. I'm like, all right, now let's peel off and watch hours of animated cartoons. But that proved unsuccessful. Maybe we'll come back around to those.
Has anyone been
Wars
keeping
and
up with the
Rebels.
new Clone Wars?
I'm still pre-watching the essential episodes.
I just started it this weekend, so I'm on episode 3 of the new season.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm through episode 4. I watched those, and then I guess it switches over to Ahsoka after that, and I haven't picked that up yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Ahsoka arc's been kind of slow so far. Because I think we're coming to the end of her arc this weekend, or this Friday will be the end of this mini arc, and I'm hoping it kind of really picks up after this one.
Did you see who they cast for Ahsoka and Mandalorian?
I did.
Good time.
I mean, that's a pretty good casting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You guys
I remember
ready?
who it was. I saw it.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, go ahead.
We got Jason Hicks with us in the house. I was going to say, but if you guys are ready, then we can go.
Let's do it. And let's before the DMV-ness
That's right. We'll get this done.
multiplies.
All right. So yeah, I was saying. I think I mentioned at least once in a tweet. We're just going to be talking about your history and your motivations and the specifics about your fantasy games, and then we'll do some show league stuff at the end. So we'll start out with the intro. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the MLS Fantasy Insider Podcast, our part 2 MLS Fantasy Homebrew Systems discussion. This episode is brought to you by the other participating commissioners in the recent presidential phone call, including MLS, MLB, WWE, and of course, the UFC. Wait, no. This is brought to you by MLSFantasyBoss.com and the amazing supporters of our Patreon group for the MLS Fantasy Insider. You guys are awesome and you rock, and we can't say that enough. I'm your host, Reed Connolly from MLSFantasyBoss.com, and tonight I'm joined by my partners in fantasy, Michael Denton and Blaine Riffle. How you guys doing?
Doing well.
And then we have a duo of guests with us tonight. We have Ian Pritchard, and we also have Josh Weber from the Twitter world. Some friends that play also in the show league that we've talked about. And these guys have homebrew leagues, fantasy players, and you guys are here to talk to us tonight. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Great. And of course, just as always, at the beginning of the show, I want to just mentioned that the reason we're still doing this podcast, and I hope the people, I know we have several hundred people who are still listening. Thank you so much. And that's because a lot of crazy stuff is going on in the world right now with the coronavirus and people working from home and stresses. And I know that Ian in particular is in the healthcare field. And so we're thankful to him for what he does for that. And we're doing this for you to help give a distraction and just at least an hour or something to be able to come in, think about your mental well-being, talk about some random fantasy soccer stuff, even though soccer's not going on right now. We still have content for you because that's just our way to get back to people right now is just mental health and some fun. So thanks for listening. And guys, thanks for being here. I said that already. So that's a double thanks. Double thanks for you all. Double thanks to everybody. Thanks. You get a thanks. And you get a thanks. There we go. All right, guys. We're here to talk about homebrew fantasy. Blaine, what kind of homebrew are you drinking tonight?
I'm finishing up a bottle of wine, and then I've got a black lager here.
Look at that. And he's still rocking that atrocious mustache for those of you who have not tuned into
the beard
this.
is coming back a little bit. My wife is pushing me to grow it, so it's coming back.
It's somehow worse. Josh, I was going to say, Josh and Ian, what do you guys think of Blaine's stash and his new look?
It was an interesting development when it got dropped in our Twitter chat. That's for sure.
Gotta lighten the mood somehow.
Corona fever.
Blaine's gone crazy with the mustache. So
I mean, the bad part about it is he didn't get to go out to any restaurants because of all the corona. I'm pretty sure if he'd gone to a few places in Kansas City, they would be like, "Oh, it's on the house. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate you finding it for us."
Oh, that's right. Missed out on an opportunity. All right.
I'm thinking it may come back for Halloween. I may just go with Andy Reid. Get a Mahomes wig for Lily if my wife won't kill me along the way.
Special permission to rock a stash.
No. If you cannot ask for permission, that's an only ask for forgiveness situation.
But honey, think of all the free stuff. All of the candy we can get.
Yeah. Somebody will give you like an 84-ounce porter or something.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ian, Josh, you guys are here tonight because we are talking homebrew fantasy systems, and I know that you guys both have a system that you've been involved with. And also, you guys have both been involved with the MLS Show League, which is a homebrew system that all of us have played in. And we've mentioned several times in the podcast, Sean, who created it, wasn't able to come out, be with us, so I thought this would be a good group to talk about that some as well, since it may be one of the more open ones for people who are listening right now. I know Sean does have multiple leagues and does open this up to more public than some of the other closed systems that we have. So we'll talk about your games, and we'll move over to the Show League and just have a good time. And I'm going to ask this question first because I didn't remember last week and did about halfway through the show. First, for both of you, have you in the past or are you currently playing the official fantasy soccer game? Ian?
Yes, I have in the past. I am clearly not playing it right now.
Of course.
But yeah, I have in the past. I have not been very consistent with playing it. It's just not been my favorite league overall. But when I decide that I like it, then I like it, and I'll play for a while, and then I'll stop.
Josh?
Yeah, I've been playing it since about 2014, I think, was the first time I stumbled upon it. I'd seen it advertised previously, prior seasons. Your first episode you were doing on this, where you were talking about the history of the game, definitely was taking me back. But I never really got into it because it was salary cap based, and at that age, for whatever reason, I was all about draft, and salary cap stuff just didn't appeal to me, I guess, for whatever reason at that time. But once I started doing this homebrew draft league, and we had a similar scoring system to it at first, and then eventually our scoring system aligned with it, I definitely was playing just so there was an easier way for me to get used to what players were good and bad and the scoring and everything, as a way of keeping up with my, it was like the side piece league to my main homebrew. But yeah, no, it's fun. I originally, going back to what you guys talked about last week, also the 2 transfer max season and the price rise, the most you could earn in a week was like 0.1 or 0.2 million in value, or lose 0.1 and 0.2. So that was the kind of game I got hooked on at first, because it was something unique and different, even different from the draft league. So it's like, oh, look, this is, at first it's like, oh, whatever, let me just fiddle with this. And then as it gets going, you're like, oh, there's strategies of this and planning weeks in ahead and trying to see if you want to have an extra substitution that week that's going to cost you 4 points on the docket, and see if that was going to outweigh the cost, and all those types of things. But I still play the game now, even though it's changed. Whether I like the changes or don't like the changes, I'm still going to play it now because I'm trying to support MLS and fantasy. Even if I didn't have a homebrew league, I think I would still, for better or worse, support what they're putting out there, in hopes that it's going to continue to get better as we move forward.
A truly enlightened opinion right there. Well, let's talk about your homebrew then. Josh, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about what got you into having a homebrew league, and just a little bit about how it works.
Sure. Well, I have to first shout out Ted, our founder at RFK Refugees. Go ahead, everyone who wants to listen to a DC United centric podcast, go ahead and give Ted and John a listen at RFK Refugees. Ted, you said the check's in the mail. Thanks, buddy. He put out a random message on Twitter. It's probably been 2013, I believe, just asking, hey, who wants to do this? Got an idea. I think we had 15 or 16 people that responded at first. Some were interested, some fell off. And before we knew it, within a weekend, he had whipped together this. I believe the league actually started the following week. So, typical opening weekend fever, as everybody starts to get in February. Well, it used to be March back then, but, the typical, oh, you're not even thinking about MLS. And then, oh, it starts next week or 2 weeks. Even the casuals, you start, the advertisements get pushed in their face and they're interested in it and everything. And we got this league together in the weekend, like I said. It was weird because if anyone's ever commissioned a fantasy league, this was everything not to do as far as getting a league off the ground. I mean, I think it was like, oh, the draft's at 10 o'clock, and if you can't make it, like, okay, oh, well, you'll just join, and whenever you jump in, we'll let you make 3 or 4 picks in a row, and we'll just move on without you type of, like, random chaos anarchy at first. For good or bad. But the point is, of those, I think we started with 16 12 of those really did stick it out that whole season, even though it was hard. We were doing Excel sheets, getting email back and forth, and keeping our scores together. I think each team took like an hour for us to someone to score manually, and we were doing that for all 16 teams each week. It was really just 2 or 3 people doing all the legwork. So I know I feel the pain of what the Nerd League guys were talking about last week as far as wanting to pay someone allocation money to do their scoring. I thought that was actually a genius idea. I would totally have given up a draft pick back then for someone to have just handled all that for us. But so Ted got us off the ground, and I was just a participant. I didn't actually know face-to-face anyone that was in the league at that time. And then it was only 3 or 4 months into it, and I think we'd lost a couple owners' interest for sure, and even Ted had lost time to keep up with it as his school or workload had increased. And then I kind of jumped in. I'd always kind of run the pages like an admin on the side, and then I kind of just jumped in, and he turned the reins over to me as commissioner like midway through that first season. And we slogged through the rest of that season and the following season. And we almost didn't come back for the 3rd year until I believe that's the first year that MLS and Opta like lined up. And then the Opta stats we were using got incorporated into the MLS fantasy game. And that's when we decided to go ahead and just link that up and scrap our old scoring system we were doing manually and just say, okay, whatever the MLS stat points they get are, that's what we'll go with. We would still make minor adjustments for Reed's favorite category, secondary assist, in case they got left out along the way, as they used to back then.
Because it's garbage.
Have a guy. Yeah. We won't go into that. But they used to have a guy, Ben Jada, for any old
right.
MLS fantasy heads remember Ben. He used to always go ahead and announce stat corrections they would have. And it would sometimes be like Tuesday or Wednesday after the weekend games. They'd be like, oh, so-and-so just got an official secondary assist stat. And I remember having to go in and like fix the standings because I think one time like a Darlington Nagby secondary assist actually like swung a matchup, and it was like 4 days after this guy won. I had to like explain to him like, no, you actually lost, and here's why. And we don't have a rule to prevent this. Commissioner headaches. But the basis of our league and what we get into is we're in season 8 now, and Ian joined our league last year, so this will be his second. Well, we get to finish this season. Will be his second full season with us. But we're just like any NFL fantasy you've ever played. If it's like the default settings that you would go join on ESPN or Yahoo with your friends, it's very standard 18-man roster. We have a 10-team league now. We've had 10 for the last 7 years, where you're starting 11 guys each week. You got 7 on the bench, and the point system, like we just talked about, is strictly the same as MLSF, with trades and free agent pickups. So you don't have to worry about salary caps or how many DP spots you have and all that. It's not that. I want to say nerdy, but it's not like the Nerd League guys. They have it down to a much more nerdy niche
Science
as far as the rules are. Science, which is great. I love the analytical stuff that goes into that. I remember I talked to Harrison a few years ago, and once he showed me all that went into that, I was like, I don't have time to run my league and join that, but that is awesome. Like, please keep going. Like, it's so cool to hear, because I'm sure there's others of us out there that have leagues that are similar to that type of setup.
So what did you find was I guess besides the time, what's been the biggest challenge that you face week in and week out with this league?
The biggest challenge, I guess, is if you don't go ahead and write down what your bylaws are on day one, every rule written down on paper. As you go through, somebody, inevitably, we've had several people over the years, shout out my boy RVB Fit, who's the most notorious for this, will always try to find, even by accident, they will find loopholes in your system. Hey, had this thought, is this something I can do? Can I make, this player's injured, can I bring him back early? We have a couple injured reserve spots. There's always types of challenges as a commissioner that goes into that type of stuff that you really just have to, you live and learn sometimes, and you make a decision on the spot for better or for worse. And then you make sure you write that into your rules as soon as you're like, oh, that was an oversight, but moving forward, here's how it goes. So we've had a couple of those hiccups along the way. But for anyone that's ever commissioned an NFL league, if or any fantasy sport really, if you have those rules in your head and those principles and you stick to them, they apply to the soccer game just the same. So the real challenge is just finding someone to do the work. Who's going to do the scoring each week? Who's going to maintain the Google Docs or the emailed Excel sheets or whatever it is that everyone's using to make everything tick behind the scenes, so to speak. And, you know, as you guys have all found, a lot of people are very quick to be like, oh, yeah, I'll play. Okay, but you need to do your own scoring each week, and it's going to take you 30 minutes. Oh, I don't have that, you know, I'm busy. I don't have that kind of time.
Mm-hmm.
And but once they commit and you let them in the league, and they, in our case, once they draft a team, you really don't want to find someone to take over the team that they have nothing to do with mid-season because the other guy, you know, bailed. So there's really type of a vetting process that goes into, you know, you don't just want to take anybody. You want to make sure, hey, have you done anything like this before? Hey, are you interested? You know, are you just a casual fan or you're a hardcore fan? All those types of feeling people out goes into that kind of stuff.
Here we go. So small correction. I had forgotten when I first was getting this organized a couple weeks ago. I'd actually asked Ian to come to the show to talk about the show league because Sean couldn't come. So he doesn't have his own system. He's representing that system, which several of us all play in as well. So same question for you now, Ian. Tell us about the show league, and if you can give us some of the history of Evolution. You think you've been playing longer than I have in the league. So if you could tell us something about the history of the show league and what that is, we'll do some comparisons since you're also in both of these leagues tonight.
Yeah. So I got started with the show league back in 2014. Their last season of 2014. It originally started as I'm actually not a huge MLS fan. I love soccer overall, but like MLS is probably not my primary league. A big Bundesliga fan is what I watch the most of for sure. But I'm also an Everton fan, and one of the Everton fan channels had started a MLS channel as well. And so because I was into Everton, I was following them, watching their videos. I saw that they had put out this kind of fantasy league for their MLS followers. So I started up back in 2014 and kind of been playing ever since. It's definitely one of the most intensive fantasy leagues that I've ever played in or has developed into that. When we first started, it was kind of pretty simplistic. You kind of put in your score prediction, you picked your players, and you were done for the most part. But over time, it has developed into one of the most, if you want to be generally on average good at it, put a lot of time into it. I know a lot of guys that are in the league do put a fair amount of time into playing it. Particularly Josh as our kind of reigning continuous champion.
No comment.
So there's a difference though between the show league and the ones that we've talked about before. So with Josh, you guys are doing a draft for your players, right?
Yes. So every February we have an annual draft. The only other thing I should have probably mentioned about our league, which is different from the ones Blaine was talking about last week, I know they were touching on it a bit, is our league is a keeper league. So every year, every team gets to keep 5 players from the year before. There's no penalty. There's no, you keep this player at this round and the next year it moves up 2 rounds. There's none of that. It's just if you draft a guy and you want to keep him for his entire career, as long as he's in MLS, of course, which is a nice little hiccup that keeps people from building too much of a dynasty, because if your player is too good, he's going to leave the league probably and go somewhere else, and then you don't quite have the dynasty you thought you had. So it's really interesting to see what your team looks like when the season ends in November. Then you come back around in February, and you're thinking, I'm going to keep these 5 guys, or I've got 6 contenders for 5 spots, and all of a sudden you only have 3 or 4 because, of attrition or people, transfers in and out, long-term injuries, that type of stuff. So that's the one thing that I would say makes our league unique from other homebrew leagues. I haven't found anyone that does a keeper league like ours without a penalty for keeping the players season over season.
Right, because the Nerd League had more of a budget-based system, and then you could only have them for, I believe it was three years, and then they rotated back in. The Blaine, your Facebook league has the draft every year, but the show league, Ian, now that's different. It has a sort of daily, weekly type fantasy feel, but how does that player selection go each week?
Yeah, so in the show league, unlike your kind of traditional fantasy, honestly, it's kind of almost more matching some of the MLS fantasy style, where you're actually picking your players for each individual game every single week. So depending on where you are in the league, you are picking a certain number of matchups every single week. So in the Premier League, which is the highest tier, generally you're picking 3 or more matches every single week. And so what you do is you pick one match out of the available MLS slate. You predict a score for that match, and then you pick 3 players from that game. And then of the players that you are picking, you can select certain roles. So some of the obvious roles are things like poachers and playmakers, where you're hoping that your poacher scores. And if he does, he scores a lot more points for you. And if he doesn't, you're penalized for it. And then your playmakers, you're kind of hoping for a high pass percentage, some assists, things like that are going into that role. And you also have some more complicated roles, some things like target man and false 10, which are really kind of rely on some really nitpicky stats. Things like headed passes, aerials attempted, touches in the box. And so that's where the time kind of intensive parts is trying to figure out which player in the league kind of is the best at each of those individual stats. And so ultimately your goal is to score the most points out of your prediction plus the 3 players that you have. And you're also given over the course of the season 4 wild cards to use. And so you can kind of pick and choose when you want to play those. And so in the show league, we have a season-long competition where your goal is to score the most points over the course of the entire either MLS season. We've done it a couple different ways where it's been kind of season-long. It's been broken up into different chunks where we've tried to fit 2 or 3 seasons into one MLS season. But then in addition to that, we have cup competitions. So amongst all the players in the multiple tiers of the league, we have one big cup, that we have a couple other kind of major competitions as well, including like a Champions League style event where you're looking at the winners of all the other cups.
And then also within the show league, you can select the same player multiple times.
Correct. So you can go for a 2x or a 3x, hoping that if they score multiple goals or get multiple assists, then you can score a huge number of points in one go from just selecting that player. So definitely some of your biggest hauls come from selecting 3 player or same player 3 times and then getting a hat trick, and you're set for that game. But it's also pretty risky because if they don't do anything, then you've wasted every single spot that you have.
So I'll turn this over to Blaine and Mike real quick before I ask my next question. Make sure you guys get some talking time.
I'll ask Josh something because I asked this last week. Josh, how does your league handle double game weeks and international breaks?
So let me take that in 2 parts. We treat double game weeks just as a regular week. So our official principle is our game week runs from Tuesday. Well, it used to be Tuesday through Monday. And then I think one year with 4th of July, we actually had a Monday game. So we adjusted it to Monday through Sunday. So pretty much the game week starts on a Monday. If for some reason there were games scheduled on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, et cetera, all the way through that following Sunday, all that would be counted as one game week. So if the guy has double game week, obviously he's getting points for both games. And the only thing we've done with international weeks are we will tend to make that a 2 full week window. So if that starts on a Monday, if there's 4 games on Wednesday of that week, those 4 games will count. And then if they're shutting down for the weekend, when we come back the following week, those weekends, say a full slate of 11 or 12 games, will also be rolled in. So we will actually freeze the rosters, no waivers or trades or anything. Once those first set of the Wednesday games kick off, we will count those games, and then everything will just kind of be idle through the 9-10 day international period. When we come back, that following weekend with the full slate, those games and points will also count towards the ones of the handful of games from before, and that'll all count towards one score to be tallied up for that week. And the only trick with that is in recent years, as MLS has been adjusting their calendar, it used to go into December, then last year it ended super early. There always seems to be one international week at the end of the season that interferes with our playoffs. So for a few years in the early going, there was still, I think, 6 or 7 games going on. There's a lot of teams playing on that week, so we included it with the playoff scores because it was most teams playing, not a lot of bye weeks. In the last couple years, I think the last 2 seasons, there has been just 3 games on that week. And one of the times it was falling on the week after the regular season, but before our playoffs started. So we've actually just skipped that week the last 2 years completely, which is weird because we've always had every game counts. If it doesn't count in the old week, it'll go forward to the next week. Somehow there's no game played that doesn't matter. But with it falling right in between the end of the season and before the playoffs, we just thought it was easiest to not have some team in wildcard weekend where it's a knockout style, having any player that could possibly play 2 games, especially when there's a 9-day gap in between the games. So I think it's the first weekend of September, that international window. We generally skip those. But then other things we'll do to balance it out is 4th of July is always a heavy week. A lot of teams have a 4th of July game or the day before or after 4th of July. That weekend, they'll all, so that if it's midweek, we will shut that down and say, okay, this is a full game week. So we're having, you'll get either 2 wins or 2 losses or a win and a loss. There's 2 games being recorded in the standings that week. The Wednesday games are going to be a whole game. Then we'll stop, reset the document, clear everything out, do another waiver process, and then open up, first come, first serve waivers on that Friday ahead of the weekend games, but we'll go again.
Gotcha. So if you just happen to have drafted teams that have double game weeks, that team will have an advantage. Because I think that's different than one of the leagues we heard from last week.
They will. Most of the people in our league over time, as like I said, you get that February excitement, and you find out you're having a draft via Facebook Messenger that's going to last you 4 or 5 days, and you're trying to figure out who you're going to pick in the 11th or 12th round. Most people aren't even thinking about, hey, let me look at week 35 and see who plays twice. And for 2 of those years, and I don't think this is coincidental, but for 2 years in a row when that was an issue, there was one team that had a double game week in week 35 for our championship match, and it was Chivas USA both seasons. And I would say to them, if you want to pick up a Chivas player and hold him all season just because he might play twice, go for it, because you're not making the championship game anyway.
Ouch.
But now with decision day, that last week, every team has not only just one game that last week, but its kickoffs are happening at the same time, or East goes once and then the Western Conference follows. So decision day at the end of the season, now that they're trying to make that a thing, has actually really increased just how exciting our championship game has become each season. Because there's none of this, oh, well, this guy played Friday, let me switch my Sunday player because I'm gonna take more risk with my, I have a guy with the late Sunday game. There's none of that. Everyone's kicking off at once and just pick your 11 and roll the dice and see who comes out on top.
One of the other nice things that Josh's league does for international breaks is allowing you to put players on IR for the international breaks. So if you have a large number of players that are all going, away for the break, you're at least not completely pointless for that week. So you have a little bit of flexibility to get some pickups during that kind of time period.
Nice.
That is really nice.
I was going to say, Josh, I was going to follow up with that. As another commissioner, I know MLS schedule gets a little crazy. If it was ever possible that a team would play 3 times over that 2-week interval for an international break, would you count all 3 scores?
We haven't come across that. We wouldn't. Well, at least I don't think I would. I'm against triple game weeks. It was one season, and I believe it included that random international break in September I was talking about, where Montreal Impact had a game rescheduled from one of their CCL runs in the spring, so it got pushed way later in the season, where they had a double game week, and then that following week they were one of the few teams playing during the international window, where they actually had 3 games. But because that was also our playoffs, we only had 6 of the 10 teams alive, and actually 2 teams had a bye. So there's only 4 of our 10 teams playing that weekend. None of the 4 teams had Montreal players, so it didn't become an issue. But in that case, I believe I would propose that you would just take, if you're going to count 2 scores, pick the best 2. If you want to add a Montreal player at your own risk and take, 3 bites at the apple, as long as everyone's playing by the same rules, I don't see a problem with it. Fundamentally, though, I would be against it. I'm okay with the double game week. In other sports, if for anyone out there that plays fantasy hockey or fantasy basketball, God bless you, that's a lot to keep up with. We won't even get into baseball.
Oh my gosh!
Those teams often have unbalanced schedules anyway, where they're scoring based on a 7-day period or a 14-day period, and you see a lot of guys where, oh, I'm going to drop this guy that only has 3 games this week and pick up this guy who has 5. And if you just load up your schedule right, just by being smarter than your opponent, it doesn't matter who you're playing really. They could be worse players, but you will beat them on a cumulative point basis just because you were crafty enough to look at the schedule. So we try to avoid having anything like that happen, but there are scenarios where, when you look at some of those, we used to have 10 or 12 game double game week sometimes on the Wednesday when they're trying to pack all those games in there. And at that point, everyone's going to have, a lineup full of guys that have a double game week. And it still comes down to the quality of player. If I only have 3 double game week players, but they're Valeri and Vela and Pozuelo, and you have 6 double game week players or 7, but it's like your goalie and a couple defenders you picked up off the scrap heap. I mean, I'm probably going to beat you anyway just because I have a better team and you're scraping by. Although, because we have a keeper system where eventually you will see some teams build a dynasty and some teams have to go into rebuild mode, we don't want to take away the chance in a one-off scenario each week over week where that underdog can beat the better paper tiger. So if you want to go ahead and pick up 11 guys on a double game week and drop half your roster to make it happen on the chance that you can get 1 win in the standings for 3 points, go for it. Like, that's the beauty of the game. You can play it however you want to play it. Some teams are very clingy to their top, 2/3 of the roster. They don't want to lose, DP players, guaranteed starters, guys that are keepers, guys they have year over year that they just like. Some teams like to try to get the same goalie or the same defender season over season just because they'd like to root for them. And then other teams are not shy about slashing, 7-8 guys off the roster each week and adding new guys and just playing the matchups. And we did have a guy one year who on paper probably had one of the 2 or 3 worst teams after the draft. He only had 3 keepers. Another thing about our league is our keeper spots are tradable assets, just like our draft picks. So some teams don't, you can keep 5, but some teams will trade those assets to try to move up and get higher picks in the first round and such. So this guy only had 3 keepers, and yet he was able to play the waiver wire and the allocation order like nobody's business. And he just looked at everything. He wasn't trying to build star players into next year. He was just trying to win that season. And he actually finished first place over our 27-week regular season just from working that waiver wire week over week, making the right captain choices and such. And he was able to, you look at his team, you're like, just very opportunistic approach to playing our game.
So that's similar to some of the other systems where it's a little bit more closed, a little bit more restricting what you can do week to week, though I do like that international reserve mechanic. That's really cool.
Yeah. And what that started out as was just as a spot for injured players. So if you have a couple guys that are injured, here's 2 IR spots. A lot of football leagues, it's very common to have an injury spot or 2. If a guy's out with a long-term injury or even a short-term injury, as long as they're designated as out, you can put them on IR and replace them on your roster. So that was the same thing. And then with international breaks come around, you're missing a couple players. And, we had a scenario where some guys only could field 9 or 10, and it just made sense to go ahead and give them that budget, that roster exemptions to go ahead and move players from national team duty on over, especially with all different competitions that it's not just Americans where it's Gold Cup, but then you have so many internationals in MLS where they have Copa Centenarios and they have their own national team qualifiers and friendlies and, any other tournament that can make CONCACAF some money, these guys are flying away for. So.
So you've got that side. Then Ian, you're playing in both of these leagues with Show League and with the official fantasy game. There's a lot of flexibility where it changes week to week. How do you find your interest is maintained going back and forth between the more closed system of having to plan out your trades versus just having the freedom to change things every week with Show League and the official game.
So I actually find that my interest is piqued by having the kind of that competition, having to pay attention to stuff
Mm-hmm.
on a regular basis. So one of the things why I've kind of lost a little bit of interest in the official game is the amount of flexibility and being able to change stuff so often. Kind of just distance myself a bit from it to some degree. Whereas with the Show League, I had to be so detail oriented in what I was doing in order to be, making sure I was picking the right guys every single week instead of just captaining Velo last year, the entire year. And then with Josh's league, having to kind of really plan out who I can work with to kind of get trades and kind of think, a couple years in advance on what I have to do, because one of the big reasons that got me interested in it. I think one of the other big things is, for me, the Show League and Josh's League are big kind of community based. So we have a really good group of guys who play both of those games. It really gets me into talking about it and kind of communicating with them on a regular basis. And so kind of having those discussions and kind of being involved in that sense of community about the leagues keeps me into it, as compared to the show, like the official game. I just don't have that same sense of community as much. Because a lot of the same guys that I'm in the Show League with or in Josh's league, they may be playing the official game, but we're not necessarily talking about it in that same context. So for me, I just really kind of get into that community aspect, and then kind of the very detail oriented as part of it.
No, that's a fantastic point, because I do think that is a key element. And Blaine, you could probably speak to this very well, being involved with the Facebook one, that those communities are the key element that all of these homebrew leagues have had, and I think that's the biggest pro that my project's been here with Fantasy Boss and with the Patreon community with MLSFI. It's like we built communities, and that's what's kept the podcast going. That's what's kept the website going, and the Reddit and all that. Now the Discord, like that's where the hub has been. And you're absolutely right. That has definitely been lacking from the official game. You could have your head-to-heads, but it's hard to sometimes make them. They're usually head-to-heads built from communities than necessarily created there. Blaine, you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I was going to say that's hugely accurate and a pretty important point that I think MLS should take a look at too, is the community side of this, because I have to say, without this podcast, I would not still be playing the main game as strongly as I am now. I wouldn't be invested nearly as much, and this podcast has helped me stay invested. I know there have been a couple of times, because I'm not as fully invested in the MLS game, I've been tempted to throw my week in order to win a head-to-head that was based on the game. We just had a league running, but we had a Facebook group, and I got invited to what started as a Cascadia group. Why a sporting fan was allowed into a Cascadia league, I will never understand. But I had a vested interest in beating up on the Cascadia players as much as I could. And it was fun to be the outsider in there, but I was tempted to, against better judgment, sacrifice my overall team to go for that head-to-head win, because I knew my opponent and it was a game I really wanted to win, and I knew if I could outpick him on differentials, it was huge. And I still find myself wondering, should I sacrifice my overall ranking to go with one of these groups we have, whether it's the Show League or the MLSFI head-to-head league or the Tacos league that I was playing in. I've always gravitated towards the groups, and that's where my homebrew league comes in. We've got 36 players this year, and we're all in a Facebook group together. We all trash talk a little bit. We all kind of go back and forth and discuss different things. But in my league, I know all of those guys. I've interacted with them in discussion forums and in this game, and it's just it is that sense of community that really keeps me involved in all of it. And it's the same with Show League. It's the same with all these leagues I play in. It's the community aspect, and I can't say enough about our listeners and the Reddit community and the Twitter community that's out there. Like, that's what's kept me playing as much as I have over these last few years. It's knowing that there's people out there that are interested and invested that I can talk to. And I mean, on a personal level, I went through the thing with Lily being born prematurely, and I did several of these shows from her hospital room. And just knowing that I had support out there, that people cared and were willing to listen. I mean, it was just there's something bigger about the fantasy game and building a community than just playing a game on the website, and that's what's kept me involved for so long. And it's what I think is a huge part of all the homebrew leagues. Like, I'd love to play in a keeper league. I just haven't found one, in my league isn't a keeper league. I think it's fun to play that style, but it's all about getting to know the groups. And sometimes I want to join other leagues, but sometimes I know I'm going to be the outsider, and that's just not as appealing to come in as the new guy all the time, because it's nice just to know who you're playing against, and you get to know their trade habits and their quirks, and really just dig in. Like, I know if I draft certain players, I've got another guy in the league who's going to overpay to get them back because I took one of their favorite players. Like, there's so much joy in being able to work the game and picking on players that you know will overpay for certain returns. That's part of the joy of the fantasy communities as a whole.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback on what Blaine and Ian were just talking about too, with that sense of community there, is I think it all comes down to really what you prioritize. So for me, I prioritized a homebrew league and show league, and didn't really prioritize MLSF fantasy as much at first. That was just a way to see what the scores were for my players. Because a lot of people, if they finished, in the top 10 for the week, they might put a tweet out about it and tell their friends and be really excited about it. If I happen to finish in top 10 for a week, I might be like, oh, how'd that happen? Was that an accident? Because I'm not putting as much effort into that. My priority lies with, did I win my weekly matchup in my fantasy league? Did I win a trophy in show league? Because if I did badly in those leagues, I'm going to hear about it from my community. I'm going to get trash talked to. I'm going to get made fun of. My phone's going to blow up if I don't perform in those leagues, because that's what I put all my energy and priority into. Whereas on the other side, if I finished outside the top 200 for the week or even the season in the MLS game, who's really going to know about it? Because some weeks I don't even check and see what my ranking is. I know it's up there. I usually, I'm up there in the top 500 or so when I'm putting effort into it. And for a while there, I was running with the top 100 or so, but it still didn't mean as much to me. And you guys have touched on all this stuff. Is that because there's not weekly prizes? Is that because there's nothing keeping you invested in how you're doing weekly, and it's all focused on the season-long aspect of, it's a long play? We've talked about all that stuff before, but it really comes down to just what you prioritize. But nothing can replace that sense of community. And I'm sure if we had Ben on here or someone from MLS, they would say, oh, we do have the ability to create your own leagues out there in the MLS game, and there is a way to create that sense of community. But if you've already got it elsewhere, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to transition back, or, you can't have too many communities, or I don't know. For me, it seems like some people, it's whatever matters to you most. And if that's not what you prioritize, then it's never going to take that next step, which is why I'm so team draft when it comes to this type of stuff, because that salary cap game, while it will pull casuals in, I also think it will keep casuals casual. But you need that season-long grind of a draft league over a 27 or 34-week season, however you set it up, that will really make you emotionally invested week in and week out, because you can look at standings that have points. Americans, we love grids and standings. These are the things that we can speak to. If I see I'm in the top 200 out of 20,000, that really doesn't tell me as much as it will if I can look and see I'm in second place out of 10. And I'm, currently sitting in a first-round bye, and there's 5 weeks to go in the season. And, now I know, I need to focus for the next month. I don't want to fall out of that playoff bye. And I just think we're so geared, whether it's because we've been playing NFL fantasy for the last couple of decades, but that's just how we think.
Well, you're sort of jumping into my next question, and that was, what do the leagues – no, you're fine. What do the leagues that you guys represent offer? Like, what could MLS learn from your league? So I'm taking community off the table. So is draft what you'd like to offer?
That's definitely what I would like to offer. I've been team draft once I found that MLS was even doing fantasy back in 2012 or 2013, I was surprised that it wasn't any type of draft function. I'm still surprised now there's no website out there that's come up with a way to make draft a thing, at least in MLS. I know I believe, I don't know, is Playtoga still a thing? I know they were doing EPL draft for a while. I don't know if there's any other sites out there. For the European soccer, I don't follow it as closely when it comes to fantasy. But
EPL has a draft element to it. Like they kind of run concurrent now. They have the season long and they have a draft. I've never done their draft system though, so I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I just think that, I mean, everybody knows someone that plays NFL fantasy, and like it or not, that's the sport that Americans kind of gravitate to every fall. And a lot of MLS owners are also NFL owners, and MLS was set up the same way. So it only makes sense that eventually the fantasy league will get set up the same way. And, people like, setting the lineup and sitting there on the weekend and seeing how their team performs every Sunday. They would do the same thing for MLS teams on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday kick, with the ability to make trades and trading draft picks and all that stuff. That's what we speak to in Americans. I know, people from Europe and other places, like, what's the super draft and all that. It doesn't speak to them, but that just speaks to our culture.
I don't know how much the super draft should really speak to a culture over here. Perfect timing because Josh just dropped. So, Ian, same question to you. What does Show League offer that you think MLS could most benefit by for the official game?
Obviously I already touched on the community part, but I think the biggest part from all this conversation is that there are different levels of players. And everybody's kind of wanting to do something a little bit different with what they're doing. And that's why people make these homebrew leagues, just because they want something a little bit different. And so I think when, EPL offers the draft plus the regular season, they're trying to, create an audience for both types of players. And, for some people, they may really get into, I want to finish number 1 out of 6 million in the, in the Premier League, or, number 1 out of 20,000 in MLS. That may be the most important thing to them. But for a lot of people, it could very well be, I want to finish the best out of my group. And I think one of the things about, the Premier League fantasy is by having both of those options, for a lot of people, if you, are into the draft and you have a draft team, it's not that much more effort to kind of look at your regular fantasy too. And so if you're paying attention to both of those things, then, you're going to stay invested in it. And so I think the same is true with our Show League group. We have different levels of players. We have some people who are really invested in kind of spending a lot of time. We use all the Opta scoring. And so we use WhoScored to kind of generate all of our data. And so we have some players that have created massive Excel spreadsheets, and doing a lot of data scraping to try and kind of figure out who is that best player. And then other people are just kind of using their gut instincts and saying, well, I think this is the week that this team does really well. And they're putting, say again?
Jason.
Yeah. We have some players that, put the feelers out to everybody else to figure out what they're doing too. So, there's different levels of players for any sport. And I think that's one of the things that's really attractive about Show League is that you can do well with minimal investment and some gut instinct, but you can also do well if you put a lot of effort in and your goal is to kind of finish number 1 overall. But at the same time, it's still fun. The community's there. And so even if you're not, winning every single week or getting as many points as you want, you can still have that sense of community about it.
So there might be some weird pop-ups coming up from the screens right now for people, and that's because I had locked the room after we started to prevent Zoom hackers from jumping in on us, and now Josh is trying to get back in, and I'm trying to make that. There we go. It worked. So there was that.
I think the other last thing I'd say is that that sense of community builds the game. I kind of mentioned that I've not been the biggest MLS fan, but the reason I'm into MLS is because of knowing all of you guys in the Show League chat and kind of getting invested in that game. And now I moved to an area that was away from most of my friends and family. And so now living in the DC area, I've met a bunch of the people, we've gone to games together. And so that kind of keeps me invested in paying attention to MLS. Yeah. And so that's been one of the big reasons I actually still pay attention to it. Because if not, I probably wouldn't pay nearly as much attention.
And there is
as
some
a Chicago Fire fan, you certainly need a reason.
Yes, exactly.
And there is some overlap in a lot of this. Like I know Jason Hickser, I think, is with us right now in chat. He'll send me messages from time to time about his draft league, like asking me for recommendations. And I'm not in it, so I don't know the ins and outs with what's going on or what systems he's in. But there are some things that overlap. Now that you're back, Josh, question for you and Ian, because I asked this last week, so Blaine and Mike know. As far as draft goes, do you think that the biggest hindrance to draft is until maybe now we didn't really have the number of quality players from the limited teams to really allow for a robust draft? I mean, what I'm getting at that is, like, if you wanted to have a draft league of 10 or 12 guys, did you have that amount of quality players who you could rely on for consistency and good point generation without having to get too far down to the MLS depth chart during a draft where you just felt like you had trash on your team?
I think there's definitely something to that with casuals. As far as, I mean, the draft game, when MLS decides, and I say when because it will happen eventually, even if we have to wait longer than we want to. It will come. Like anything, it takes time to grow it, and it's not overnight. It's a slow build. So it will still, it will get there over time. I think the fact that there's more recognizable names coming into the league, that certainly would help that grow. But I still look at every team. I mean, most teams, you still have, you have your main striker or two. You've got an exciting attacking midfielder. You've got an exciting winger. So no matter how bad the talent is over the history of MLS, you still can generally look at a starting lineup and say, okay, who's going to score goals today? Well, let me take the striker. Let me find who's wearing number 9, right? Let me find who's wearing number 10. Let me find the winger that looks fast. Okay, these 3 guys look. I mean, so no matter how bad the talent is, you still can look at each team and find 3 or 4 players that, if someone's scoring a goal on that team, these are the guys who are going to generate those fantasy points. If that team has a good defense or a good goalie, you can still look and be like, well, MLS hasn't had great talent over the years, but American goalkeepers have always, that's something we do well in this country, is producing goalkeepers historically. So you can usually look around and find an American who's going to get you a clean sheet or 2. You can find a tall center back who's going to rack up some aerial clearances and headers, those types of things. So I don't think it hurts at all that we now have these big superstar players coming into the league. Not that we didn't before, back when Beckham started that wave, but even more so now, whether you want to call it because of the TAM or the GAM or whatever is bringing those players in now, it certainly wouldn't help to speed it up a little as far as growing the appeal of it, because there are more players, and those players I would say are not just capable of scoring, hey, I might get a goal or 2, but they could get a hat trick plus an assist. I mean, some of these guys, I think it's because all the money that we talk about the TAM game is going towards the attacking talent and not so much on the defensive end. You're seeing that unbalance, but who doesn't love scoring? I mean, I'm not a big hockey guy anymore. When I used to be, once they came away from their second strike and scoring increased because they changed the rules that made it more friendly to have more games that would be 5-2 or 5-3 instead of 2-0 or 3-1. Who wants to come and see? Not everyone sees the beauty in a 1-0 soccer game compared to one where you can come and you see it's 3-1 or 4-1, and that's what you paid your admission ticket for. So.
To me, I don't think that's been I would think of that as a big barrier. I think with pretty much every fantasy or league out there, in any sport, there's always that kind of top tier player that a certain number of people are going to get, those types of players. And then the bulk of your team are going to be trying to find those above average players or playing the matchups when it comes to draft. So I took the plunge and did NBA fantasy this year for the first time. And, I was fortunate enough to get like a James Harden, who's like one of the best NBA fantasy players. But the reason that I ended up being successful overall is I got a bunch of really good kind of mid-tier players that were scoring me a bunch of points every single week. And I didn't have a bunch of those kind of bottom tier that, just didn't bulk, I guess fill up my roster. And I think that's kind of the same is true no matter what league or talent level that you're dealing with. If there was one, David Beckham type superstar and that was it in MLS, you're still having to fill up everyone else. One person has that and everyone else has to fill up their league or their team with a bunch of average players. And so you got to find the best average players in that.
I guess what people really want now is like fantasy NCAA. Is that the itch that's not being scratched as far as basketball goes? I mean, maybe that's just the region I'm from. That's the fantasy basketball people would tap into. I'm sure there's so laws about that.
Heavily missing. I'm from North Carolina. I'm a big Duke fan. So I was missing out this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, indeed.
Don't worry about it, Josh.
Ian thinks his team would be playing tonight or something, you know?
Likely. I mean, it's guaranteed, I think, actually, that we would have been playing tonight.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's because most of Duke is on the Pelicans now, so I mean, we probably have money in that game.
I was quite disappointed. I wanted to go see the Pelicans play the Wizards this year, and they should be playing, or they should have been played like 3 days ago, and clearly I did not happen to see that.
One of the fun videos I've been seeing online while people have been staying healthy at home here in Kentucky and rewatching sports moments is, for some reason, and I don't know why parents are doing this to their children, is parents have been replaying the Duke Kentucky game with Christian Laettner and just recording their children's heartbreak, and I find it cruel and unnecessary, and
I
a moment not to relive.
I got a lot of great enjoyment out of those videos. I think
sure.
CBS Sports Network replayed the Duke Maryland Final Four game from 2001. I'm sure Josh remembers it well.
Baxter was fouled.
But
my shoulders.
we tangent.
Ian knows what I'm talking about.
We tangent. One thing I will pick up that you had mentioned, Ian, going back with Show League, and Mike and Blaine, see if you guys agree with this. Mike has often said that and I'm slowly coming around to this side as well, that he believes the game can be as complicated as it needs to be, and as long as the rules are clear and explained, that people will understand and play in it, and it doesn't matter. And something I like about the Show League that I thought potentially could carry over is, if you keep that multiple transfers, having more options of how you use those players gives you the diversity, but it still makes things fun, as in, with the Show League, not everyone's necessarily locked into a position. You have roles that people could play. So instead of with fantasy, if we brought over that role system, unless you're a forward, you can only be a forward. But like, okay, you are Zlatan, and I'm going to give you a role that's not just, which would be stupid based on how that role worked out last year. But you're Jossie Zardes. I'm going to give you a different role than just the target man or just something else, just the playmaker. But if you could have more variety in how you used your players, instead of just you're a forward, you enter the forward spot, there you are, that could be a fun lesson to take from Show League to MLS, where you could start adding in layers of complexity, but it still remains approachable by a casual fan. But yet, as you guys were talking about, those people who want to dig in more to find out how to min-max the stats from the different roles, and even situationally with MLS Fantasy, if you could even move someone between forward and midfielder, knowing how they might line up against a different opponent might be able to help you take advantage of a more passing or assist focused game from a player than necessarily a more target focused player. Those could be some levels that could be fun to add in, and maybe, by gosh golly, we could have defensive midfielders actually be worth something.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that flexibility in the game is always kind of nice. To some degree, I guess the biggest downside right now is maybe the MLS League or the main fantasy game is a little bit too flexible. Definitely one of the nice parts about the Show League is that you can assign those different roles, and different players can do different things for you depending on what you want to do. You're given a certain number of roles every single week. So one of our better roles is the target man. It's one of kind of the most consistent point getters out there, but you're only allowed one of those. So it's not like every single player on your team can be a target man. You have to kind of assign one. And so if you want to use Zlatan as a target man, which he's great at, you've got one shot at it. And so you may have some other players that could be really good target men, but you've got to pick something else for them later down the road. So I definitely think that kind of, game week variability and but also restriction is nice. One of the things I said, I like the Bundesliga a lot. I play the regular season Bundesliga fantasy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really like about it is that you have a structured roster. You're allowed 3 transfers every single week, but then you have game week variability in the fact that you are allowed to move your players in and out. So unlike the Premier League fantasy, they don't lock in. You're also able to change what's effectively your captain from your different players throughout the game week. So if one player doesn't do really well, that's a big bummer, but you can just either take him out of your starting 11, or you can move your star man, which is their captain, to another player. So you have that kind of mix of some people can just set a team and deal with it, and then other people can have that, ability to play a lot into how much do I want to kind of pay attention to it.
Don't they have star roles for each of the 3 field slots as well, where they get some bit of a bump?
They do. So you get a star defender, a star midfielder, and a star forward.
Yeah.
And one of the
that
things
was cool.
that's kind of nice, I've never really understood this about MLS fantasy, where defenders score less points for goals. I get they may be more likely to get some kind of defending bonus points and stuff. But in the Bundesliga fantasy, defenders kind of get more points for attacking stuff. So you earn a lot more points when your defenders do good attacking stuff. So you're really incentivized to find those kind of wing backs that are getting forward, kind of getting assists, getting goals, and things like that.
Yeah,
The defenders do get more points for goals.
I think,
but none of the rest of the stuff. Yeah.
Ian, I think you're hitting on what I said last week, and I'll say it again just to get it out there. And I hope James will pick up on it, or Ben will listen and pick up on it. That I'd love to see the MLS fantasy scoring rubric broken out a lot better, instead of being a threshold system. 4 interceptions is a point and everything. I'd rather see every interception be 0.25 points. That way, if you hit 5 or 6, you get the benefit of those. Same with passing, same with every stat on the list, because then you start getting fractional points, and those aren't as clean and aren't as easy to display at times, but you get rewarded for everything your player does. And the example I gave last week is like a wingback that gets a couple of attacking points or a couple of bonus points and an assist gets 6 points, and a defender that gets a clean sheet and a yellow card and plays 90 minutes gets 6 points. Like there's a huge difference between a defender getting a clean sheet and a yellow card versus an attacking player who gets a couple of bonus points, or a bonus point and an assist. And it would be really nice to see that broken out. And I know Show League does the different scoring by roles, which I don't think the way MLS is set up it could use, but a more robust scoring system would definitely break some of the deadlock we see in there, and add some spice and give some variety to your players, because it's crazy when we start picking teams based on clean sheets, because we know they're going to get so many points and we think that's the best chance at getting points. It would be so much nicer to say, hey, I don't care if DC gives up a goal. Briant is a great defender and he's going to be involved. He's going to get me 4 or 5 points, regardless of whether he gets the clean sheet. And I'm not just hunting the clean sheet to get those extra points. Let's break them out and get a little bit more variety in the player scores. And then managers have a lot more challenge to go find who's going to be the best each week, instead of just kind of picking who's got the best game against the best matchup. They really have to dig into the deeper stats.
Yeah, I mean, and I hate to keep harping on the Bundesliga game as compared to the MLS game.
It's a good game.
One of the things that I think they do well is, instead of it being like 4 interceptions where you're scoring a point, most of their stats are based around 1 or 2 of something occurring before you earn points. And so you feel, if somebody only has 1 of something, you can feel, okay, well, maybe I didn't deserve points. But when you're sitting at like 3 or 6 of something before you get a point, it's kind of a bummer, because they're not having necessarily a bad game, but ultimately you didn't end up getting that extra point, and then they let in 1 goal and all they have is 2 points for the minutes played, and you just kind of feel like, well, he had a good game, but oh well.
Yeah.
Right. So, final question that I have, Josh, is your league open to the public, or how does one get into your league?
Our league is not currently open to the public, but we have been talking about expansion from going to 10 to 12 teams the last couple of years through various reasons. We've had some turnover the last couple of years. I think we lost 2 teams in each of the last 2 seasons. And that's not uncommon for a league that has casuals in it to have casuals then say, hey, I'm married now, or hey, I just had a kid and I don't have time to still do this. Maybe I'm in the process of moving, new job, whatever it is that goes on in our personal lives. So while we're not open to the public, we've had a short wait list over the years, but it generally hasn't taken too long for someone that really wants to be in it to have an opening come to them. And on top of that, like I said, we have mentioned expanding from 10 to 12 or even up to 14 teams. Just as MLS continues to add more teams, now we have way more players to pick from. So whereas before 10 might have been the right number when we had, say, 20 MLS teams, now that we have 24 or whatever we're up to now, it's hard to keep track, and headed towards 28, eventually, 30, wherever we're getting to, as more, and every team's getting their own DPs coming in. You want to keep that waiver wire. You want there to be talent available, but you don't want it to have really any star-studded talent or any real difference makers that someone can just keep swapping out star players for star players based on matchups. So you do have to grow along with MLS. That's probably one of our challenges for the future. So yeah, we are looking to expand, and if anyone's interested in joining Draft Keeper League, they can certainly hit us up on Twitter, and we can get you information and get you on the list, which is currently at like 1 or something. So it's a great time. Business is booming after this podcast, maybe. But yeah, go ahead and reach out on social media. Funny story about that is we have a Facebook group that's private with just 10 or 11 members that we've used to kind of organize things, rule announcements and changes and such over the years. And every now and then I'll get a random person, usually it's from Africa or not even from America, that will reach out and ask to join. And it's just because our group is literally called MLS Fantasy Draft. So they've Googled fantasy or draft or MLS draft, and somehow, I don't know if they're looking to try to get into a combine invitation or what, but they stumble upon our league. They have to join. You can pretty much tell. You can tell right away that it's spam. And the one time I got a request from someone that was actually in America with this guy Zach, and I saw it at first, and then because it's not something you check frequently. By the time I saw it, it was like 5 or 6 months outdated. So I went ahead and accepted that and asked hey, are you interested or whatever? And he was not a heavy Facebook user. So he went 16 months without seeing this message. So almost 2 years have gone by. Once he saw that message, it was like we needed a team, and it was like a month away from the season. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, I forgot about this. That's perfect." And we hit it off right away. And he joined the league. I think he was in for three seasons.
Nice.
Great guy. And that was just totally random chance. He just saw it on the internet. Requested to join, forgot about it. 2 years later, boom, he's in. PayPal and his league dues in and everything like that. It was so divine the way it all happened. But there's no wrong way to get into fantasy. Like Blaine was saying earlier, he didn't want to be the outsider in the league. Well, sometimes the hardest part is just taking that first step, because the sooner you join, the sooner someone else is going to come after you, and then you're not the outsider anymore. You're not the new guy. So
I can't imagine not being on some sort of social media platform for that long.
Oh,
that's wild.
Man.
Ian, I know that probably Show League is maybe one of the more accessible systems. I know there are 3 different tiers. If someone is interested in trying to get involved in that, how is the best way to go about that for someone?
So Show League is definitely open to the public. The best thing to do right now is just to reach out to MLS Show League on Twitter. The league is run entirely through Twitter, so you do need to have a Twitter account. That's the kind of one barrier to entry. But with that, Sean, who is kind of the league administrator, can get you set up. There's no charge or league dues or anything like that for the league, so it's completely free to play. It's just up to you to kind of put the time in to playing it.
It does have promotion and relegation between the three different leagues. I am like forever not going to be able to get to the Premier League because like I feel like I always get into like a top 5 sort of situation into a little playoff and then it just nope, doesn't happen. So it just never works.
That's all right. We're all in the same boat, just losing to Josh. All.
Very true. Very true. That's how that goes.
I was one game away from winning the second tier on my route to promotion to the Premier League, and Josh stole it from me between, I think it was Philadelphia and Red Bulls were playing, and I just picked the wrong goalkeeper.
Oh.
And I didn't have that problem because my motto, as you guys know from the last time I was on, is #never Red Bulls. So.
No problems there for you. Mike and Blaine, any final questions before we wrap up? Nope. All right. Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Ian, for coming out with us tonight. If people are interested in touching base with you guys on Twitter, how can they find you?
So I'm on Twitter at @RIanPritchard. Pretty simple and straightforward. The only difference is my name is spelled IAIN instead of IAN, so it complicates my life. But that's how you can find me.
Yeah, and you can find me at Salisbury United, or just search Josh Weber, and I'm sure I'll be one of the first 10 or so. It's bound to happen. And then before we wrap up, I know we all play Show League, and I know I'm not here representing Show League, but I just want to go ahead and throw out there, if you're a casual in any way, or if you're a diehard super analytic nerd, like Show League is for both sets of those people. It is
true.
I don't know if we touched on this when I got disconnected, but it is. Ian talked about if you put a lot of time into it, you get a lot back. That's true, but you can also put very little time into it and still get just as a rewarding thing because it's just predictions based. I mean, you can ask, and you can be a casual and you have just as much luck as I do as predicting what the final score will be of 3 or 4 games from the handful of games each weekend. And with the roles, they're not mandatory. The roles are optional. If you want to get deep in the weeds and find out who's getting all the aerial clearances, who's blocking the most shots on defense, who's getting the most tackles stuck in midfield, and you want to use those stats to better yourself in your advantage and take the risk that a role comes with, you can. But if you also just want to pick, hey, I'm going to pick the starting striker from each team, and I'm going to pick the best designated player or the best central attacker or, one of the goalies because he's my favorite player, whatever it is, you can do that too. And at the end of the day, your points could be exactly the same. I do think at some points as the game has evolved, there is a point where the players that know how to weaponize those roles do have an advantage because they can have a way higher ceiling than you will have unless you just luck into somebody getting a hat trick. But for the most part, when you guys are talking about getting promoted and relegated, you can get promoted without using any roles at all. And I know that because Sean let me do a test team in the lowest level league one year where I didn't use I only used, I think, poacher and playmaker were the 2 roles that I got to use. And I still got promoted out of that league. And that was actually fun to try to put teams together using the vanilla roles, as we call them, and just picking the best players. And I feel like if I had been a casual, that would have been enough to hook me into wanting to learn more just by having to use those basic, like I said, picking the goalie for the home team or whatever, just those simple logic principles. And as Ian said, it's free to anyone. And it's a great thing to go ahead and build. It's got a good pyramid set up. It's a great community to get into. So anyone out there who's looking for something different besides the MLS fantasy game that we all have come to love and hate at the same time, you should definitely reach out to Sean and go ahead and get set up so that whenever MLS does come back around, you can go ahead and enjoy all the things that has to offer you.
Josh, you're making me feel bad. I still haven't got promoted out of Dev League, and I've been tryharding pretty bad.
What?
Just start using playmakers and poachers.
Josh getting promoted, I think, just speaks to how good he is as a fantasy player as compared to what the average person may do.
My dad taught me to play fantasy football when I was like 9 or 10 years old. I've had my own team since I was 12, so it's just kind of a part of my life at this point. So, that could be true, though.
Mike, any final comments? Plugs or anything?
Not really. I mean, the only thing I'll mention about Show League, which I don't think we've mentioned particularly, is that I really like how it forces you to analyze the game tactically. We talked about it a few weeks ago as far as MLS about, does the knowledge of the formations matter? And I said for fantasy MLS, honestly, no. It's just about points and likelihood of scoring goals. That's absolutely not the case in Show League. You really need a better knowledge of how players play tactically, how formations can kind of interact, as well as a much heavier knowledge of the data. Ian did mention like data scraping, which is a huge part of if you want to do well in MLS Show League, because the stats aren't publicly available. You got to go get those in order to see, hey, which roles match up with stats. So that is something that I really like about Show League, is that it does force you to analyze the game more tactically, and maybe that might be something MLS consider more if it wanted to get more complex. But that's just something that I think is really cool feature that we hadn't specifically mentioned about Show League that I just wanted to
Yeah.
It's definitely true, and one of the things I like about it, because I mean, with your 3 predictions, you have some roles that are kind of defender based and some that are attacking based, and so you were trying to pick those matchups where there's going to be a lot of kind of defensive points. It may end 1-0, and then you're trying to use your attacking roles in games that are going to be 4-0, 3-0, anything like that. So you're really kind of incentivized to know what the games are going to play out like, and that's what makes you do well.
There's even some bonuses if you pick the team or teams that are least selected.
That is true.
So
So
little fun
you
twists.
want to pick
there.
FC Cincinnati on a regular basis.
That's right.
Exactly.
See, there is a point. Blaine, final comments, plugs.
Yeah, it just get involved in some of these communities. I mean, if it's joining Fantasy MLS on Reddit, or connecting with us on Twitter and just engaging, or reaching out to MLS Show League on Twitter, or communicate with any of us, and we'll get you hooked up with Sean to get in Show League. I mean, Show League's always able to expand. I'm looking for more players in the Dev League to compete against anyway. I mean, you'll get to play me. I haven't gotten promoted yet. I don't think I'm getting promoted anytime soon. I've been learning a lot, but it's just fun to play, and it's fun to really get to know your community and join those chats. I'll never forget the Show League intro questionnaire that I had to do. Just a great get to know you type of thing, and everybody here has done it. It's a blast. It really gets you acquainted with the new guys as they come in, and fantasy is all about the community. And I have to thank every one of our listeners who's tuned into this one and tunes in through the season. Like, we do this because of the community, and community is the main reason why I'm still playing any form of fantasy in this game. I mean, I've dabbled in other games, fantasy football, and my favorite year in fantasy football was playing against people that I knew, and they kind of dissipated. And so this is where I'm at right now, and it's all about community. Community keeps me involved in these games. So if you're listening to us, if you love playing fantasy MLS, great, keep it up. We love competing against you, but try joining one of these communities if you haven't yet. Like, there's so much going on. I'm hoping my Facebook league will be able to expand and add another league or two and get a few more people in there. We just need help running it, and if you want to help run a league, by all means reach out to me. I will help you get set up, and we'll get you in next season. But that's a big thing, is it's community focused, and if you're not part of one of these communities, get involved. It really can be life-changing.
It absolutely has for me. Like, I moved to an area where no one was around, and now I've got a bunch of good friends that live in this area. We've gone to games together. We met up multiple times, so it really makes a big difference.
You guys have said a lot of good things.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to piggyback on that, what Blaine was saying, and Ian also, and just say that we need so much to distract us right now with all that we're going through. So, if there's anyone out there listening to this and you want to start your own MLS keeper league, I'd be happy to help you, commissioner behind the scenes, get you up off the ground. If you've got 9 friends and you want to join a league, send you our bylaws, like whatever it takes to make more of these communities pop up, because that's only going to help the game of soccer grow overall. And I know I have some people out there, I've heard that, there's not a team near them, like Mike down there in Louisiana, he has the Man City connection. He roots for NYCFC. We can understand that. but there's not a local team in his backyard. Like someone in New Mexico or wherever, where there's not a team that's close to you in that region. But, you know, my best friend, and he's been in the show league with us, and he's been in my draft league for several seasons. And, you know, he traveled around growing up, and he doesn't claim any one team as his own. That's one of his struggles. He's like, oh, who do I root for? But he loves the players and he loves the league. So he will follow and support everybody. And that really has helped him grow closer when he's coming to play fantasy. Is you can't pick on him because, oh, he's going to want to load up on this team or that team. He's a fan of the league as a whole. He doesn't claim any one team as his own. So, you know, that really helps him in fantasy because he has to learn everyone who's the best players, how does his team like to play, this coach or that coach, and, you know, all those types of things that go into it. And that helps to make him a better player because he's just a fan of the league. And I think people in those regions, you know, it's okay to just be a fan of soccer in America as a whole. Where you live now, you might not have a local team, but, you know, 5 or 10 years you might, and you can then support them. But in the meantime, it's still okay to get hooked on the league because they signed one of your favorite players, and then just, you know, follow that guy's career until he leaves the league, and you can support that team, and you can jump around. You don't have to just be tied to one team forever. It's okay to just support the growth of this sport in this country as it continues to get bigger and bigger over time.
There you go. All right, you guys have said a lot of excellent things, and so there's not really much left for me to say except thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed some of these little different fun episodes that we've been putting together. Next week, the plan is to talk about the best MLS team of all time. Asterisk there. Maybe not of all time. We'll do it of the modern MLS fantasy era. So with our more modern scoring system, the best fantasy team of all time since 2002-ish, I guess, or a little bit later, 2012-ish. I guess that's what we're going for here. But we'll have that's going to be our next show. If you have any other ideas of what you'd like to hear us talk about, please send them to me on Twitter, either at MLSFantasyBoss or at MLSFI. Either of those on Twitter, or hit me up on Reddit, or send me an email. We want to have content out there that you guys like and want to listen to and just help distract from all the craziness. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you guys for coming out here and sharing your systems and talking about something that we tend to glance over every now and then during conversations, but don't often get into. So thank you so much again, and good luck.
Thank you for having us.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thank y'all.